Alright guys, in this video I'm going to show you how I made what I think is the absolute coolest original DMG Game Boy. This is Steve from Restalgia, and let's get started. Alright guys, so welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, please consider going down below the video and subscribing as we are working our way towards 30,000 subscribers. Now straight out of the gate, I want to let you guys know that Retro Modding is the company that sent all the parts for this build out to me, and I'm actually pretty excited about this because I've had an original Game Boy laying around and it's not in the greatest condition. I mean, the shell's okay, but the screen is really faded, it doesn't look very good, and to be completely honest, playing on an original Game Boy just isn't really that great anymore, especially with the types of modern technology that we have nowadays. And I'm sure I'm not the only person to experience that some of the old glue that kind of sits around the lens of an original Game Boy tends to dry up and get old, and it just kind of stops working, so the lens ends up falling out. Now, I actually had a couple of things sent out to me. The first thing is going to be this new LCD display. So this is actually a Game Boy IPS LCD screen, which is going to be notably different than some of the backlight mods that you would have seen for a Game Boy. What you're going to get on this is a substantially sharper image, and I will later on in the video show you guys a side-by-side comparison of what the original Game Boy looks like versus what this screen is going to look like. Now in the packaging, we're actually going to be getting a really neat 3D printed spacer, and it's nice because this spacer is really simple to pop in, and it makes sure that the screen is 100% centered inside of the frame. We're also going to get a main control PCB. This is actually going to replace one of the boards inside of the Game Boy. It's going to have all of the commands in order to get our button mapping working and everything. It's actually pretty simple. It's just a straight swap with the one that's already in the console. Next, we're going to have a second PCB, and this is going to be an encoder board. It's just going to be designed to transfer information from the LCD and convert it to a form in which the Game Boy can read. Then we have the actual IPS display. Now you're going to see this is actually a very long display, especially considering when we're looking at a Game Boy, it's got a very small square display. That's totally fine. The image is programmed to display just in the space that's required, and when I get it up and running, you guys will see just how perfect it looks. Next, we're going to get a couple of the ribbon cables. We need those obviously to connect all our boards together. And that's actually more or less it in terms of what we get with the LCD kit. But Retro Modding was actually kind enough to send me a really cool shell. And the shell they sent over was a Metroid themed shell. This is actually one of their own custom shells. And I gotta say, this thing is freaking awesome. When you look at the actual art on it, it's not just silk screened or just printed directly on the plastic. It's actually raised, and I'm trying my best here to get it so you guys can see kind of the texture that you have right on the shell. It looks and feels absolutely incredible, and I'm really impressed with this. And obviously with this, we're going to get everything we need to replace the entire shell. Now that's going to include new buttons, and what they've gone with here is a very themed look. So we get transparent red buttons, and then we also get these almost like neon green start and select buttons, and it's really going to help complete the look of this shell. Now in terms of pricing, the IPS display is about $70 on the Retro Modding website, so it is a little bit on the higher end of things. That being said, when you get it installed, you're never going to need to do anything else to your Game Boy again. This is above and beyond the absolute best option than anything else on the market for replacing the screen on a DMG Game Boy. And then the cost for the actual shell is a little bit on the high end. We're looking at $49.99. That being said, it is a very custom piece, and it does include the glass lens, which is custom printed to match the case. So I mean, this is kind of a fringe type of item. It's something that somebody who's really interested in Metroid products might be interested in, but it may not be for everyone, so just keep that in mind. Now, I'm not going to do a full detailed installation. I'm more or less just going to kind of go over the basic steps. This kit is very self-explanatory. It doesn't take a ton to get this thing up and running, especially with the brackets that they provide. So obviously, the first thing that we need to do is disassemble our Game Boy. So we're going to remove all the screws and we are going to separate the two halves. Now when we do get it separated, we want to be careful because there is a ribbon that's connecting two different boards inside of the Game Boy, and we need to make sure we remove it without causing any damage. So in this situation, if you are actually going to be doing a new housing mod and you're going to be doing the new LCD screen installation and you've got new buttons and new pads and everything else, you actually don't need anything from the front half of the original Game Boy. So we're going to go ahead and set that aside. Now that being said, with this installation, there is a small little bit of soldering that is required, and that's going to be to install a speaker to the new board that they provided. Now, if you've got a new speaker like I did, I purchased one, you can go ahead and wire that in. It's pretty simple. That being said, if you didn't and you want to just transplant your old speaker, you are going to have to desolder it from the old board and move it over to the new one. Now going back to the back half of the original Game Boy, there's going to be obviously a board inside and there's a bunch of wires and a whole bunch of other stuff going on. We do want to remove everything out of this because we're going to be transplanting it to the new shell. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And once it's actually removed, it's not a bad idea to kind of go over things with some rubbing alcohol or some isopropyl alcohol in order to get things nice and clean. I mean, these things have probably been sitting around for decades, so it's not a bad idea to kind of scrub some of that dust and debris that may have settled in there over the years. Now, in terms of actually implanting the LCD screen, it's pretty simple. The frame that they actually provide you that's 3D printed has little grooves that actually fit all the boards perfectly, including the LCD. And before we go ahead and assemble everything with this frame, it's probably not a bad idea to grab some Kapton tape and stick the back of the one PCB board with it, just to make sure that nothing ends up shorting anything out. I don't anticipate it was an issue or would be an issue, but certainly it doesn't hurt to throw a little bit of tape in there just to kind of further insulate things. Once you are good and ready, you can then go ahead and grab that PCB board, stick it into the frame, and it kind of snaps into place nice and easy. And then we can, of course, grab our LCD and slide that into place as well. Once you're happy with how those things look, we can go ahead and attach the LCD ribbon into that converter board so that way it is good and ready to run. And then next we're going to go ahead and grab the new Metroid Shell for the front of the device, and there's going to be some small modifications we have to do. There's actually going to be a couple standoffs that we have to trim. Those are going to be towards the top of the device, and that's just so that way the LCD can actually fit flushly in there. And additionally, there's also going to be another small piece of plastic that needs to be clipped towards the top as well. But once you get all those out of the way, the screen is actually going to slide beautifully right into place. The frame actually has little pockets in which different standoffs can connect into, and it really just holds everything perfectly in place. Next, we want to go ahead and start reassembling things. So we need to grab our new buttons and our D-pad, and we're going to go ahead and throw those in. And then of course we also want to grab any of our rubber membranes and stick those in as well. And once we're happy with the way it looks, we're going to grab our new PCB and we're going to connect the ribbon cable that came off of our LCD screen, so that way that's already done, and slide it into place. Now they've already got this design, so it has holes pre-cut, and it just actually can really only go in one direction, so you get it in and you're good to go on to the next step. We need to make sure that the speaker is fitting into its little groove so there's no problems there, and just make sure some of the extra wire, if you have any, is tucked away so it doesn't get clipped or caught in the actual frame when we're closing it. Next, we're going to screw everything down in place to the front of the board, and once that's done, this half is more or less complete with the exception of putting on our lens. But now moving on to the back half of the case, it's actually pretty simple. We're going to go ahead and grab our back half. We're going to put in all the appropriate parts that we need, but it more or less just kind of dumps in. Now it's important to mention you are going to have to transplant the little battery connectors into the rear housing. And once that's in there, you can go ahead and grab the back half of the PCB board from the original Game Boy, put that into place. We're going to want to make sure that we haven't forgotten to put in our power switch, and then there is also a custom colored link port, which we're going to include here as well. Finally, we're going to screw all the pieces in together so it's nice and solid, and then all that's left for us to do is to connect that ribbon cable coming off of the first PCB board into the rear housing PCB board, and we're more or less good to reassemble at this point. So reassembly was a little bit tight because everything's new. The flex cables had to be bent just a little bit in order to kind of fit inside properly, but once you kind of get it closed and you start screwing things in, it stays solid and there's actually no problems at all. But yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of assembly. It was actually a fairly straightforward install. This took me maybe about 30 or so minutes between kind of modding and actually adjusting and really not looking at any set of instructions. I just kind of went with how things look like they should be connected, and it was actually very, very straightforward. But I do gotta say, this screen, when you get it up and running, is mind-blowing. It looks so good on the original Game Boy. And what I'm going to do is just throw on screen the same game running on the original Game Boy versus running on this new screen, so you guys can see one-to-one exactly how much of a difference there is between the old DMG Game Boy screen and this new IPS display. As you can see, there is a night and day difference. It looks absolutely stunning. And the shell itself really, really makes it stand out. I'm very impressed with the quality, and to be completely honest, I'm not surprised by the quality because retro modding's been in the game for quite a while, and they've been putting out some really high quality things, but this case is almost like nothing I've ever seen before in terms of the way that they printed on it. It's raised, it looks good, it's sharp, it feels nice. The buttons and the D-pad do not feel cheap. They fit nice and snugly inside. This actually feels like it could have been a product that Nintendo officially released. Now, obviously it wasn't, but that's how good this feels. Now, aside from this just being a beautiful IPS LCD display screen, we actually have a few other kind of cool features. One of them being that it has the same viewing area as the original display, and the other is that the contrast wheel was actually replaced with a brightness control wheel. And not only can you adjust the brightness on it, but you actually have 8 different color modes to choose from. So if you're kind of tired of the standard gray and black look, you can actually filter through and have a whole bunch of different color palettes to pick from, which can really change the way some of those games feel. Now keep in mind, even though this is an LCD monitor, if you're trying to play some of the Game Boy Color games, you're still going to have them displayed in the two-tone colors that they would have on an original Game Boy. We aren't going to get the color palettes that we would have seen on future versions of the Game Boy Color. But that's more or less all I've got for you guys in this video. I will leave some links down below to the retro modding website where you can take a peek at not only this shell, but a bunch of other styles that they have on their website, as well as access to this IPS monitor. Now keep in mind that if you are going to pick it up, you do want revision 3, and the reason for that is because in previous revisions, you had to do some manual solder work, and this is probably going to be your most streamlined approach. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Please consider going down below the video and subscribing. Give the video a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you didn't like it. Let me know in the comment section below. Is this too expensive for a shell? What do you think about this mod altogether? Does this not look like the absolute best DMG Game Boy you've ever seen? I want to hear from you guys. Let me know. But thank you guys so very much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys again real soon.